So let's say a Hail Mary together to start our class. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and to the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Wow, beautiful weather, huh? A little precursor to summer and nice 80 degrees. So, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Bueno? All right, good. The start of a new week here. Here's our agenda. We are right here, Monday the 7th. So we're going to be going over some notes today, but not so much together. I'll do some of it with you, and then I'm going to come around and see if your textbook is working. If the app isn't working, then the website always works. So I'll just kind of remind you about the fast way into the web version of the textbook. And we'll also do some practice problems. This involves what's called Punnett squares. Some of you know what that means because you had it in junior high, but others maybe not. So we're getting caught up. At this point, we've really just talked about how cells reproduce with mitosis and meiosis, how gametes are formed, but now we're going to get into the practical part of genetics, and that is figuring out what offspring might be. This is called genetic counseling. We used to have a science teacher here in our department who did that for a career before teaching. And so this is something that happens when couples have a history or family history of a certain genetic difference, which, if you have both recessive genes, could cause a problem with their offspring. Any number of diseases. As we saw with the cracking your genetic code video, that was pretty interesting, wasn't it? How that code has been figured out down to every letter. Billions of letters have been figured out, and if you're off by one or a few letters, that could mean that you have a defective gene. And genes code for proteins, so it could be as benign as not being able to digest milk to having Huntington's disease or something that is really life-altering. So we're going down that path of learning more about the probability and probabilistics of genetics, and there are some practice problems, and when you get into those are Punnett squares. So we'll do some of that together. There's also an alien genetics worksheet. It's listed there, but the due date it is at the end of our next class, so we're going to work on that together. You don't have to do it as homework, but if you want to take a look at it, it is available now for you. The notes that we're doing in the class today, it's called Introduction to Inheritance Notes. Those are due tomorrow night for you guys. So when I made up this agenda, it's a little bit off, but you'll notice that the due dates are in the assignment. So we should get almost all of that done today. It's really important for you to understand what you're doing in class. So if this is all new to you, it's going to maybe feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, wow, I don't get that word, and what does this mean? That's okay. It just takes a few times going through it, and then it will really click. So you didn't have the opportunity to have office hour after this class. So later on this week, if you need help, come on into office hour and get help with your understanding. Office hour isn't just meant for making up work, it's also for building your study skills. To help you understand the importance of that, did you see this announcement? It's at the top of the screen here. I just built this announcement during lunchtime. It emailed it to you, so make sure you're checking your emails throughout the school week. Don't let days go by without looking at it, because you would miss announcements that can help you with an assignment in your classes. So a lot of you have not come in to office hour to look at prior quiz scores. That's really important for you. I made an analogy here. Every one of our sports, after a match, they're going to review the film. They're going to see what did we do good, what do we need help with, and you adjust your practice so that you can build skills to shore up any deficiencies. The same thing in academics. So reviewing your quiz scores is going to help you understand the correct answer, because this might come back around again on the final. So you don't want to not understand stuff we've gone over before. So it's your chance to see the right answer and why you missed it. You have to understand why you missed the question. Was it that you just didn't get around to studying that? Did you make a silly mistake because you went too fast? I have been giving you a lot of pictures on quizzes, and those quizzes will help you answer that question and probably 3 or 4 other questions on the quiz. So take the whole quiz as a whole and understand that. And then evaluate how effective was your studying. You know, once you have your study skills down, you're going to study less than a student who feels like they have to cram. They're cramming with the intent of getting the content for the first time, and they're worried about not being able to do it all, getting confused, getting stressed out, staying up late, throwing off your whole schedule. That's just not a way of approaching your academics on quizzes. You'll earn the A in a class a little bit every class period, and it's not all at the very end. So evaluate your study. Did you study enough? Were you practicing ready? If you got an A on the last quiz, great, keep doing what you're doing. If you didn't, if you got a C or a D, then look at why. If you don't, then you're bound to do the same thing again. And then it's frustrating, and then it's no fun, and then, the wheels start coming off. So we have office hour built in to help you, but that's not the only time. If we need to set up another time to do that, then let me know. And if you got an A, you probably had a study partner, another student, or you became your own study partner by printing up blank sheets and then just running through it. If it's getting close to match time for your sport, and they're looking for the varsity players, it's the one that can demonstrate it during practice. So you have to practice it. You have to practice your academics. It might sound like extra work to some of you. Like, I'm not going to do that because I want more free time. I don't want to do homework. But A students often don't even have much homework at home because they're really focused and they get it done during class. So check yourself throughout your classes. If you're not doing well, are you distracted by your iPad? Are you sneaking your phone a lot? And you can get away with that sometimes. But really it shows in your performance. So I made this available to you so that you can click right here and see your quiz scores. You can see which ones you missed, and then you should evaluate it. If you want help with it, then see me about it as well. All right, let's click over here to our assignment, and it is called Introduction to Inheritance Notes. Last Friday, I recorded question 25 to 35, and so that is available to you. I will also make available the beginning of the worksheet and the notes in a video, so you can see that as well later if you would like. It also helps people who are absent, but if you wanted to see it again, then that's always available to you. So you can click into Introduction to Inheritance Notes, but I'm going to start by showing you this video.
Wrong.
3,
Fix
2,
it with Airman.
Sorry about the commercial.
Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk, grew and studied peas. That probably doesn't sound that exciting, but what he learned about genetics changed everything. Let's look at what he did. Mendel bred pea plants, looking for many different traits like color, or wrinkly or round seeds, or tall or short plants, among other things. Once he had a purebred trait, he would run an experiment. Mendel crossed two purebred traits. We'll look at green versus yellow-colored peas. When the offspring grew, he found that all of the peas were yellow. He couldn't understand why the green trait disappeared. Why didn't the peas have a 50-50 chance of being green or yellow? To explore this further, he took two peas from the...
What question on the worksheet says, what's a purebred? I don't have the worksheet in front of me. Is it question 6? Is it farther than that? Anybody find what question the purebred question was?
I think 9.
Good. You recognize question 9. True breeding is the same as purebred. If you want to write that down on the worksheet. Purebred. A lot of you guys have dogs, and you probably have a purebred. That means that it's 100% this variety of a dog, like a German Shepherd or a Chihuahua or a Dachshund. So if they have all of one type of gene, they're called a purebred. So the definition of a true breeding variety is that they don't have a mixture of genes. They have one gene. So you'll be able to answer question 9 and 10 here, and also 11 while we watch the video. So they showed a purebred green and a purebred yellow. But when he mated these two and they had offspring, they were all yellow. During Mendel's time, this is 200 years ago, they thought that genetics was a mixture of genes. So you would have gotten like a lime green. You would have gotten a color in between green and yellow. A faded green, a greenish yellow. It should have been a blending, kind of like mixing watercolors. That's how they thought genes were. But a purebred is just this gene here, and let's get some terminology. These guys right up here are the parents. So they're called the P generation, P for parents. The kids right here, the offspring, there's a Latin word for offspring, and it's called filial, F-I-L-I-A-L. So we're going to use the letter F for short. This is the F1 generation, the kids. Then when I hit play, it's going to show inbreeding with these two, and they're going to have offspring. So then we're going to have the F2 generation. So you see how that works? P generation, F1, and then F2.
First filial, or F1 generation, that was just made, and he bred them together. Yes, this is inbreeding, but they're peas, so no one seems to mind. When the second filial generation arrived, F2, 75% of the peas were yellow, but 25% were green. The green peas seem to disappear in the F1, but magically reappear in the F2 generation.
So Gregor Mendel was a monk. He wasn't even setting out to be a scientist. But as all monks really do, they're well educated. So he went to university, studied math, studied physics and chemistry, and so he really had a critical mind, and he's working in the garden and then noticing that the plants are acting weird. This isn't the way that they thought that inheritance worked in his time. The green disappeared in the kid generation, even when he had hundreds of plants, not just 4. And then when he bred a couple of these from the first generation, then lo and behold, the grandparents' traits start popping back up again. So it skipped a generation. So he didn't know anything about chromosomes, doesn't know anything about genes. You know a lot more than he did. So he's just going to use generic terms. He's not going to call it genes. You hear say that these are traits, and he's going to call it a heritable factor. He does figure out that it takes 2 factors, like you get one from mom and one from dad, and that sometimes one wins out over the other. We know that's dominant. So there's dominant genes, and then the one that, the green, it disappears, it's recessive, but it can come back if it's homozygous recessive. So yeah, there's a little bit of terminology for you to catch here. After today's class, if you don't understand this, just review it for 5 minutes and make sure that you have a good understanding before we get to the next class. Because you saw on the agenda that I was showing you that we're going to have a quiz on this material in 2 days. So we're going to have one more class of notes to talk about this again, and then on Friday you're going to have a quiz. The reason for a short amount of time is because on the last quiz it was 4 weeks at the beginning of the semester before a quiz. And what some people do is they just sweep the material over in the corner and let it pile up. And then when it comes time for the quiz, then they look at the big mess of material and it's all jumbled, it doesn't make sense. So the way to break that habit is to demonstrate how having a short amount of time, and it's almost like a pop quiz, right? Where it's shortly after it's presented, so you have to stick with it. So if you're getting an A on homework and C's and D's on tests, just shorten the amount of distance between when a class information is presented and when you review it, and you will find that your grade is going to get closer to your homework grade for quizzes. All right, here we go.
What could be happening? Mendel decided that there were factors, which we now call genes. The genes could be either dominant or recessive, and dominant alleles or traits mask recessive alleles. In this case, the yellow is dominant and the green is recessive. So the purebred parents made offspring that had green and yellow alleles.
So she's thrown out this word allele. I think we heard that before. That word means a different form of the gene. So we have yellow and green. How do you know which one to use for the capital letter? The one that appears more is the dominant one. That gets the capital letter. So yellow is dominant, so they use the letter Y for yellow. You always pick the dominant gene and use that as the letter representing the gene. So green is not a G, it is a lowercase letter y. So capital letters are the dominant and lowercase letters are the recessive.
Is this a question?
Yep. Who said that? Yeah.
Is this a question?
Is this a question? I don't have the worksheet in front of me, so it is part of questions, but I don't think it was just asked directly. We'll be going over a lot of the questions together.
But only the yellow showed because it was dominant. And when the F1 generation bred, there was a chance that they could both give the recessive allele to the offspring, so the green peas showed up again. If you could look at the chromosomes in the pea plants, you would find the gene for seed color. A gene is a section of DNA that controls a trait. The different seed colors have different alleles, which are variations of a gene, like green or yellow. Allele is a fun word to say, and it's actually even more fun to write in cursive, but you can try that next time you're bored. Now you get 2 alleles for every gene, because you have a set of chromosomes from mom and a set of chromosomes from dad, and the same is true for plants. When you write alleles, dominant alleles get capitalized letters, and recessive alleles are lowercase. If a dominant and recessive allele are together, it's called heterozygous. Hetero means different, and the alleles are different, so that makes sense. If If the alleles are the same and dominant, we call that homozygous dominant. Homo means same. If the alleles are the same and recessive, we call them homozygous recessive. The letters we choose here are arbitrary, but it's good to use letters that are very different when you view capital and lowercase versions, otherwise it can be confusing. So letters like O aren't good, but letters like Y, T, or R are great.
So when you're writing these, that's dominant and that's recessive. Yeah, in your mind, you meant to write it smaller, so it is smaller, as you can see slightly. But if I'm looking at this, these both look dominant. So when you're writing it, make sure that one is kind of blocky and large, and the other one kind of italicized, kind of swirly. Make it much smaller, make it look a different shape than the other letter. So that is something just to try to clean up. And then she says, O's aren't really good because, you meant that to be the lower one. If that's the case, put a little swirl on it or make it a little bit different. Letter C's are hard too. So you would, kind of have a cursiveness to it if you're choosing letters like that. So really make them stand out.
In pea pods, green is dominant over yellow. If these are the genotypes or allele combinations, what are the phenotypes? Having just one dominant allele of the gene will make it green in this case. So there are 2 green pods and 1 yellow pod.
And I think the last of the terminology is right here on the screen. Genotypes, you see the word gene? This is the genotype. The letters representing the gene is the genotype. So the 3 genotypes are listed here. Homozygous dominant, heterozygous. As long as you have one of the capital dominant genes, you're going to show that phenotype. That word phenotype means what does it physically look like? So you can almost see the word physical in there, PH. So you will be asked to do phenotype ratios and genotype ratios. The phenotype ratio right here is that there are 2 green, so this would be 2 to 1 phenotype ratio.
This is pretty simple, but let's try thinking about this in terms of making gametes. Assuming tallness is dominant, what would the genotype look like for a man who's homozygous for tall? And what are the possible gamete combinations? Now because tall is dominant, this would be a homozygous dominant genotype, 2 capital letters. Again, you can choose any 2 letters you like, but I'm going to use T for tall. When gametes form, only half of the DNA is in each cell, so only 1 allele can go to each of the sperm that are formed. There's only one possible gamete combination in this case, capital T, the tallness gene. But let's try another case. What would the genotype look like for a woman who's heterozygous for tall? And what are the possible gamete combinations? Now, heterozygous means different alleles, so this will be written with a capital and a lowercase t. This also means that there are 2 possible gamete combinations, an egg with a big T for the tallness gene, or an egg with a little t for a short gene. Heterozygous.
So I knew that I was going to run into this problem with you having the worksheet in front of you. In my other classes, I didn't have them open up the worksheet first. So when I just looked, 15 of you weren't watching the screen and you were just busy into the worksheet. So if you know the material, great, but if not, then you're missing out on understanding it so that you can do the questions much easier. And that one's on me because I had you open it up. But try to catch yourself maybe off task and get corrected, because it would have been better if you were watching up here. Now I do want to show you how to do a Punnett square right now, so pause what you're doing on your iPad and you're going to be asked to do Punnett squares. So it deals with the gametes. So we know in meiosis that it's going to separate these homologous pairs of chromosomes. That's what this is. So what you do is you make a box. And over here on the left and up here at the top, you put the gametes for mom and dad. In this case, This was a woman with a heterozygous for tall. So here it is. So one gamete can have a capital letter T, and the other gamete could have a lowercase t. And this is the symbol for female. It's like a circle with a cross. So the Punnett square shows you the gametes and the probability that the offspring are going to have. The male has got a symbol with a circle with an arrow coming out of it. And if this is the same for the father, so it's a cross of this is a hybrid times a hybrid, the same type of offspring. The same gametes. So now you play Battleship. If you played that game before, it's columns and rows coming together. So here's one fertilization event with the egg and the sperm coming together and then forming a zygote that is homozygous dominant. Then these come together, capital T and lowercase t. And if in my mind I was picking this one first, you always write the capital letter first. So don't lead off with a lowercase letter and then an uppercase letter following it. You always kind of like have a capitalized combination. Then capital T, lowercase t, and lowercase t, lowercase t. So every square is a probability. 1/4 can be homozygous recessive. That's 25%. 25% homozygous dominant, 50% heterozygous. So the genotype ratios. We have one that is this. We have two that are hybrids, and we have one that is homozygous recessive. So the genotype ratio is 1 to 2 to 1. And sometimes I'll abbreviate that GR for genotype ratios. This is a classic ratio when you have two hybrids that are mated together, like you see right here in the Punnett square. What's the phenotype ratio? PR. What's the phenotype ratio? Right off the bat? Boom, should know it. You got it? Hold off on your question, okay? Phenotype ratio, and then I'll get to your question. How many have a capital letter? 3 boxes. 3 boxes are going to be tall. So 3 have at least one capital letter right here. These 3 all have at least one capital letter. 1 is going to be short. So the phenotype ratio is 3 to 1. You have a question now?
Does the capital T always have to go before the lowercase?
Yes.
T?
Uh-huh.
Okay, wait, this is like, oh wait, never mind, I get it. Never mind.
Yep. So this is called a mono hybrid cross. Mono for one trait, we're just dealing with being tall. Later when we get to our worksheet, we're going to be dealing with 2 traits. So it'll be called a dihybrid cross. All right, now let's go over to the worksheet. And I also have the textbook open. It's always a great idea for you to have your textbook open during class. 2 reasons. You're getting your homework done in class. You're reading in class. You're finding your resources. So when it comes time to study, you've already seen everything and you know where it is. And then it's just a matter of a quick review. If you're doing this only on the last day, when I gave you that study plan, it was overwhelming for some people, and then you just don't even start. So to make it much easier, we break it down into small pieces throughout the school classes, and you could basically read the textbook during class. That would be so much better than watching a YouTube video on how to play a video game, watching a sport video, watching the Olympics, whatever it is that you're entertaining yourself. Then you're missing stuff in class. You don't know how to study and how to prepare, and so you just don't do it. So it really starts with your focus in class. So here we go. I'm in chapter 9 with the textbook, and we're in section 1. We're just going to look at a few things. And if you look at my notes as we go here, what I do is I've already gone through this on my own, and I grabbed the pictures. I made my own notes. This is a Cornell note-taking style where you do your notes, pictures, diagrams, and then you pull out questions off on the side. There we go. So, the first section, just a little bit of history. Even before the 1800s, we can go back 2,000 years and they had a different view of inheritance. With Greek philosophers recording some of this stuff down, we know that they had an idea that inheritance, they didn't know about genes and chromosomes, so they just thought whatever an organism, whatever they learned in life, that's passed on to their offspring. If they also became a good athlete and they could run really fast, throw a spear very far, then their offspring would have that. So it's called acquired traits. Changes that occur in a body during the life are passed on to the next generation. That's question number 1. So I highlighted it. If all you ever see of the textbook is a few of my highlights, you're getting 10%, 20% of the material. So if you want to move your quiz grades up a little bit, just spend 5 or 10 minutes right now during class, looking at a few more pictures, reading a little bit here and there, and you'll probably bump up your grade a grade letter. And then if you review this again at home, you'll bump up your grades. If you really want an A, make your own notes. Take your own pictures, go through and highlight all the key terms. You could outline, you could do Cornell note style. So we'll have some assignments coming up where you're going to make your own notes, and it can't be bullets. If you do bullet point notes in your classes, you're creating a list of trivia. They have to be connected with headings. You have to have titles to your notes. I always put your name at the top of your notes. So I give you a spot to write your name. A lot of people don't even do that when I give you a space to write. So always have your name, always have the date, always have titles on your notes. And that's because when a class is challenging and you're having to take 5 pages of notes during a class, especially in college, if they're not organized by date and page number, everything gets out of order and it gets really confusing. So you have to stay organized. All right, question number 2. In the 1800s, this is when still section 1. In the early 19th century, so this is like 1820s, this is the time of Mendel, they had a blending idea. So if you want to do a quick answer for question number 2, you'll write down they had a blending hypothesis for inheritance. That means that if a flower was white and a flower was red, the offspring should be pink. So it's a blending of the 2 traits. If one parent was tall and one was small, then the kids would be in the middle. So that's what they thought of inheritance for a couple thousand years, until about 1820. So that isn't exactly correct either. Blending hypothesis, because when Mendel started doing that work from the video that we just saw with the pea plants, it wasn't a blending of the traits. Some traits disappeared in the child generation and reappeared in the grandchild generation, the F2 generation. Here's the answer for number 3. It deals with this guy right here. Now, what was his profession? Well, question 3, letter B, just by looking at him, how is he dressed? Yeah. Yep. He's dressed in religious outfit. This is a monk. I don't know what order he was. But like all religious, they go to school to learn to read and write and to be able to put sermons together and be intelligent. So he studied math, he studied science, physics, chemistry. So when you go to school, you become a self-learner. You can recognize things and you're curious and you have a critical way of approaching stuff, a systematic scientific approach. So when he started doing some work in the garden, he recognized, hey, something isn't right here. This should be blending and I'm getting traits disappearing and then reappearing. So he set out to do some pretty cool experiments. He found out 4 main laws of genetics. He's now called the father of genetics. He changed the idea radically from his day of a blending hypothesis to what is referred to as heritable factors. Question 3, letter D. So you can see that I have highlights in my textbook. It's a good idea for you to highlight as well. And it's right underneath this picture right here. It says Mendel stressed heritable factors. So for your answer, question 3, letter D, write down heritable factors are genes, but he didn't know that they were genes. Remember, he didn't have the luxury of knowing about chromosomes and DNA and all that. So I think this is such a good generic name. It's almost like saying, hey, you know what? There's something there. And the thing is, it's not blending. It retains its character from generation to generation. It might miss a generation, but then it comes back and it's the same way it was for the grandparents. So really what he did is he said it retains its identity. That heritable factor that we know it's a gene, it doesn't get watered down, blended. It retains its identity. It might disappear and then reappear, and that's his second law of dominance and recessive that we'll talk about. So now we're down to question 4 and 5, heritable features and heritable traits. And I highlighted that second paragraph under his picture, chapter 9, page 2. A heritable feature, question 4. A heritable feature is an outward character or expression, like a phenotype, that can vary. A white flower, a pink flower, a yellow flower. All of these colors are a heritable feature. So the feature is a character. It's just talking about something physical with that organism. Question 5, what is a trait? A heritable feature that has a variety to it, it's called a trait. So a variant is yellow, red, green. Those are all different forms of that feature, and so they're called traits. They have the yellow trait. They have the green trait. Another name for it would be allele, a variety of the gene. So you see how there's some terms there that you have to get straight? dominant recessive, features, homozygous, heterozygous. Number 6, why did Mendel use garden pea plants? It says figure 9.2b. So in the notes, I have pictures, and it's right here. So a main picture is this one right here. Why did he use this plant? Several reasons. I think one of them is dumb luck, because the monastery had all of these purebred plants, and so he was working with them. Second, they're easy to work with. See the flower? It has both male parts called stamens and female parts called carpels. Flowers are the reproductive organs of plants. They don't always have both sexes, male and female, in one flower. If they do have them in one flower, it's called a complete flower. If it's only a male flower or a female flower, they're called incomplete flowers. So you know how this works? The stamens usually mature first so that it doesn't self-pollinate itself. This is the sexual reproductive organ, and sex involves separate partners. So if it's doing like sex with itself here, it's not mixing up the genetics. Why not just do it by mitosis? So meiosis means that you are going to make a gamete that is going to get airborne and leave that flower and plant and go blow in the wind for miles and land on another flower's female carpel. An insect might bump up to it as it's visiting it, a hummingbird, and then it goes to another plant and cross-fertilizes it. So self-fertilization, it's not normal because the male and the female parts on the same flower mature at different times. So what he's doing here is that he's even taking his scissors and cutting off the male stamens so that there's no chance of reproduction happening unless he's doing it himself with a paintbrush. So he's going to take the pollen from one plant over here, and then he's going to put it onto the pistil where the eggs are right down here. And so he's going to ensure that he's going to get the crosses of plants that he wants. So pretty good scientific approach. So we're on the question, why did he use pea plants? Because they were available to him. They're easy to work with, and he could cross-pollinate. He could control his experiment on the crosses so that he knows who the parents are. Otherwise, this stuff gets blown by the wind. How is he going to keep track of which plant fertilized it? And I'll show you question number 8. Listed right below it, pretty much right next to it, was this picture. You could draw a line from number 8 and then circle these right here. Here are the 7 traits that he dealt with. The color of the flower, the position of where the flower comes from at the end of the plant, terminal, or on the side, axial. The color of the seed, the shape of the seed, the pod shape and the pod color, and how tall the plant was, tall or dwarf. So he looked at all of these. And now I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to continue working. I'm going to come around and see how you're doing. And you should have your textbook open and your worksheet. If you lose your login with the app for the textbook, you'll have to do a password reset. But you should recognize that the textbook is available in My Lab and Mastering. And all you have to do is click My Lab and Mastering, more under the student tools, and the textbook is right there.